Why is Ireland starving due to potato crisis? Irish Potato Famine. Ireland is a country that is rapidly developing both its financial and technology sectors. The country, which is known for its high rainfall, has a beautiful green landscape consisting of coasts, high cliffs, and grasslands. Apart from its natural beauty, Ireland also has famous artists with beautiful works, such as James Joyce, W.B. Yeats, and Oscar Wilde. Rich in culture, scenery, and history, Ireland has a dark history that is fatal to its population. Everyone knows it as the potato famine. Historically, potatoes are a traditional Irish food. There are many traditional foods made from potatoes such as papita or mashed potatoes, Irish stew or Irish-style stew, and colcannon or potatoes stirred with cabbage. In 1845, a potato pest struck so hard that it left the people of Ireland starving and destitute. In addition, government policies were ineffective and did not prioritize the worsening situation of the people. We will talk about the beginnings of the famine, the consequences, and the impact of the Irish potato famine. So, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Before the Great Irish Famine, Ireland was under the colony of Great Britain. After the passing of the Act of Union of Great Britain and Ireland in 1801, Ireland was effectively ruled by Great Britain. The combined nations were called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. In order for this act to take effect, the government of Great Britain appointed an executive of the Irish state called the Lord Lieutenant and Chief Secretary of Ireland. The people of Ireland could elect their executive representatives after they were presented to the British Parliament in London. The result of these elections were mostly British landowners and their descendants living in Ireland. Racist penal laws such as the prohibition of Catholics from owning and renting land, voting, or holding government office were introduced. The majority of Ireland's population was Catholic. The impact of this regulation was that many Irish Catholics worked as poor farmers who rented land from landlords. These occupations were known as cottiers. The cottiers had to supply the British market, so they only had a limited amount of land to make their living. Potatoes, which are rich in calories, nutrients, and minerals and grow easily, were the solution. Potatoes are not originally native to Ireland. It was first introduced in the 17th century as a field crop. Then in the 18th century, the berry potato became a main staple crop. Potatoes grew well in the soil, climate, and social conditions of Ireland at the time. Cottiers can grow 3 times as many potatoes as any other crop for a year's supply of food. The cottiers could eat as much as 8 pounds of potatoes for one person, which meant that 80% of their calories came from potatoes per day. This heavy reliance on potatoes led to a lack of genetic variation in the potato crop, making Irish society vulnerable to famine. There is only one type of potato in Ireland, called the Irish lumper, which is the main food during Ireland's extreme winters. Moreover, potatoes are one of the most plague-prone crops. The potato famine, known in Ireland as Ngorta Mór, occurred from 1845 to 1852. This famine succeeded in destroying Irish culture, language, and socio-demographics. At that time, potatoes were attacked by a fungal pest, Phytophthora infestans, which gave rise to a plant disease called late blight. This disease affects not only potatoes, but also tomatoes, before it reached Ireland. Late blight was discovered in Mexico in the central plains of the Toluca Valley in 1842. In the same year, the disease affected Vermont and New Hampshire. It then spread to Belgium around 1943. By mid to August 1845, late blight had spread across northern France and southern England by ship from North America and finally reached Dublin, Ireland. The disease is characterized by blackened, wilted, and rotting potato leaves. When harvested, the potatoes will look fine. However, a few days later they rot as bacteria and secondary fungi invade to a depth of 55 millimeters or 0.6 inches. During this period of famine, the spread of disease was further exacerbated by the cold Irish weather of 1845, with humidity reaching around 90% and temperatures above 10 degrees Celsius. If the weather had been hot and dry, the spread of pests might have been suppressed. Successive crop failures occurred in 1846 to 1849 as the pest devastated potatoes. About 1 million men, women, and children died from starvation, which left them vulnerable to typhoid, cholera, dysentery, thrush, and other diseases were rife in rural Ireland. Conservative Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel still exported bran to Great Britain despite the Great Famine. He had twice served as Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1834 to 1835 and from 1841 to 1846. He was involved in the creation of a trade policy called the Repeal of Tea Crown Laws, which he implemented during the potato famine in Ireland. It was one of his most controversial policies, where he tried to protect wheat imports into Great Britain. The policy led to free trade, which was later repealed due to pressure from pro-free trade groups. He authorized the import of corn from the United States to replace potatoes in 1845 to 1846. The Irish didn't like corn because it needed to be ground twice to be consumed, and Ireland didn't have a grinding mill. When the corn supplies ran out in June, the famine continued. Charles Trevelyan was the political and administrator of Great Britain when he implemented the policy of banning the distribution of food to Ireland, which had a significant impact. This policy was based on free economic principles that tended to rely on market solutions and reduce government interference in providing aid. Trevelyan assumed that the potato famine in Ireland could be used as an opportunity to accelerate modernization and agrarian reform. He hoped that the crisis would transform the country's economy and social structure. Lord John Russell of the Liberal Party succeeded Prime Minister Peel to deal with the Irish famine in June 1846. Russell served as Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1846 to 1852. He continued Peel's previous policy of importing corn and exporting wheat. One of his programs was the Public Works programs, which aimed to help create jobs for people affected by famine. The 1934 British Poor Law came into effect in Ireland in 1838, where poor people who were still able to work were directed to live in workhouses for loan assistance, soup kitchen finances, and the provision of work such as the construction of roads, bridges, and other public facilities. In August 1847, 3 million Irish people received food aid from soup kitchens. In total, the British government spent €8 million in private funds. However, the program ended when there was a banking crisis in Britain. Then, a workhouse system was created which had been established since 1838. However, these institutions were never prepared for a major, long-term crisis. The workhouses inhabited by Ireland's 2.6 million inhabitants were so overcrowded that as many as 200,000 people died. He also provided relief to the starving poor by distributing food and staples and building health facilities. The food provided by the government was not clean, the soup containing vegetables was not tasty, and the meat was rotten. Meanwhile, political policies require Ireland to continue exporting foodstuffs, especially wheat, to keep prices high. The British government in 1846 repealed the Wheat Act to protect domestic grain producers in free trade. However, the repeal of the law could not end the famine because the Irish people did not have the money to buy foreign crops. In 1847, few viable potatoes could be harvested. New regulations placed the responsibility of paying land tax on landowners. Landowners' fear of late blight made them think about how to drive out the cottiers so they could grow wheat. Many cottiers were financed by their landlords to migrate to other countries with the promise of work and money. In the beginning, most of the burden of the poor cottiers was placed on the owners of the land on which they lived or did not live. But as the cottiers were unable to pay the rent, the landowners ran out of money. The result was a huge migration from Ireland to North America and Great Britain. As many as 1 to 2 million Irish people migrated to escape poverty and famine. Those who remained in Ireland became homeless or deliberately committed crimes so that they could be arrested and receive 3 meals a day. The potato famine coincided with the Young Ireland nationalism movement in the 19th century. In 1842, an organized movement was launched to demand the repeal of the Act of Union. A debate between two writers, John Mitchell and James Fintan Lalor, on the future fate of Ireland and the seemingly indifferent policies of Great Britain. Poets like James Clarence Mangan penned melodramatic, intense and morbid-style books in an agonizing famine. Reportedly, Ireland continued to export larger quantities of livestock and food to Great Britain during the famine. In 1847, Ireland exported peas, beans, rabbits, honey, and fish. The number of farms in the countryside began to decrease. Much of the land was used only for grazing domestic animals such as cattle and sheep that would later be exported back to Great Britain. When Ireland finally became independent in 1921, there was only a quarter of the population compared to the early 1840s. The population, which had been 8.4 million in 1844, had dropped to 6.6 million by 1851. This massive migration had a huge impact on the social history of the countries to which it was directed. In New York, America in 1820, there were 250,000 Irish citizens, making it the most Irish city in the world. Even 2 presidents of the United States have Irish backgrounds. The policies adopted during the Irish famine were based on the attitude of the British intelligentsia towards the crisis as a predictable correction and to reduce the birth rate in Ireland. As such, policies were reluctant and ineffective. Tony Blair, a British Labour Prime Minister who served from 1997 to 2000, released a statement formally apologizing to Ireland for the past major crisis in 1997. A badge commemorating the potato famine and its victims, used by Scotland-based soccer team Glasgow Celtic FC. The soccer team was founded by an Irish immigrant who was affected by the crisis. The badge was last used on September 30th, 2017 by the players. Some towns where the Irish migrated have proposed memorials to commemorate the lives lost during the potato famine. Monuments to the tragedy have been built in Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, and Phoenix in the United States, Montreal and Toronto, Canada, as well as in the United Kingdom and Australia. Museums related to this event were also established, such as the Great Famine Museum at Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut, in the hope that researchers could further research the event. For those interested in learning more about the crisis, you can visit the Sun Brodie Famine Ship in New Ross, Wexford, Portima Famine House in Portima, Galway or Strokestown Park, and the Famine Museum in Strokestown, Roscommon. In Scotland, the same drastic population decline as in Ireland occurred during the mass evictions known as the Highland Clearances, or in Scottish Gaelic as Gaized a Buntata. These events took place in the Highland regions of Scotland during May 18, 2024 to 19th centuries. During the Highland Clearances, landowners made policies and actions to evict land tenants in order to develop sheep farming, which was considered much more profitable. Unfortunately, the evictions were carried out in a cruel and inhuman way that was often accompanied by the burning of houses and the destruction of farmland and settlements. Many native Scots left to migrate to other cities or countries. This phenomenon had a major impact on the economic, social, and cultural conditions of the Highland people, including the disappearance of Gaelic culture and language in Scotland. Environmental damage due to land use change and socio-political woes for the displaced population. It is estimated that in 1811 and 1812, the population declined to about 15% due to clearances and emigration. However, the figures vary considerably depending on the region and time period.